Initiating development with the king's knight, immediately contests the center and opens avenues for queenside expansion. Challenging white's central space immediately, establishing a solid pawn presence. Opening the diagonal for the bishop prepares a solid setup, aiming for central influence without immediate confrontation. Developing a knight to its most natural square, this offers flexibility and prepares for castling while challenging white's central influence. Unleashing a central pawn thrust, white immediately challenges black's space and initiates a dynamic pawn struggle, aiming to open lines for piece activity. Solidifying the center with e6 aims to develop the bishop to f5 or g4, but it slightly restricts the queen's knight and may invite white's d4 push. Solidifying the queenside, this move prepares the fianchetto, aiming for a controlled game. Solidifying the kingside and preparing for castling, this develops a piece towards the center while keeping options open. Developing the bishop to the d4 square offers solid defensive support and prepares castling on the kingside. Securing the monarch within its fortress initiates a period of calm development, preparing for potential central skirmishes. Solidifying the center and preparing for queenside expansion, this knight establishes a solid presence. Asserting central space aggressively, black challenges white's ambitious pawn structure and aims to open lines for counterplay. Opening the center immediately clarifies the pawn structure, potentially leading to dynamic play and early tactical opportunities. Reclaiming the pawn solidifies the center and prepares for active piece play, while white's queenside remains slightly underdeveloped. Liberating the d-file opens avenues for your queen and rooks to pressure black's weakened pawn structure. Recapturing the pawn immediately reopens the central tension, preparing for further queenside development and aiming to contest the d-file. Targeting the queen directly while establishing a powerful central bishop promises an active game for white. Repositioning the queen to d8 sidesteps the bishop's pressure while preparing for a potential queenside pawn push. Castling secures the king, finally anchoring white's pieces for the impending positional struggle ahead. A natural development, this knight eyes central squares, preparing to contest the d-file's dominance. Unifying the rooks and preparing for potential central breaks is the priority, offering flexibility for future operations. Developing the bishop to a more active square, aiming to pressure white's queenside and prepare for potential central pawn breaks. Exchanging the bishop opens the g-file for the rook, potentially creating attacking chances down that flank. Reclaiming the queen instantly reestablishes material equality and centers her presence, preparing for a more active role in the unfolding middle game. Concentrating forces along the c-file, this establishes active pressure on black's queenside. Solidifying the queenside pawns prepares for potential queenside expansion. Pressuring the queenside pawn structure and preparing a central pawn push. The knight's advance to e5 boldly contests the center and challenges white's bishop pair, preparing for potential pawn thrusts. Dislodging that pesky knight from the center immediately opens a diagonal for the queen and simplifies the position, creating potential weaknesses. Recapturing with the queen reestablishes central presence and opens the d-file for potential future action. Opening the d-file now demands black's immediate attention, creating a dynamic battle for central influence and potentially exposing the king if not handled precisely. Central pawns vanish, opening lines and signaling a shift towards active piece play as the d-file becomes critical. Opening the central files dramatically shifts the game's dynamic, forcing black to react decisively to the sudden pawn pressure. The queen retreats, securing central control and preparing for pawn advances on the queenside. Unlocking the e-file for a potential kingside assault, while accepting a temporary pawn deficit for active piece play. Suddenly, black's queen aggressively ventures forward, eyeing the unprotected pawn on a2. Initiating a kingside pawn storm aims to pry open lines and attack the uncastled monarch. Bringing the bishop to defend the queen against the looming rook and pawn pressure is a sensible defensive maneuver. Pushing the pawn further attempts to restrict black's queenside mobility and prepare a kingside assault, but it might overextend. Consolidating the pawn structure prevents immediate kingside breakthroughs, but surrenders vital squares for active piece play. Repositioning the rook to the third rank aims to pressure black's queenside pawns and create attacking opportunities along the c-file. Rethinking the pressure on the d-file, black repositions their rook to bolster defense and potentially prepare for later activity. Repositioning the rook to the g-file aims to create attacking possibilities on the kingside, potentially targeting black's king. Consolidating the queen for defense, preparing to contest the open file and potentially exploit imbalances. Prying open the queenside, this challenge forces black's king further into the center's storm. Strategically rerouting the rook to the queenside aims to bolster its queenside presence and prepare for a potential breakthrough. Shifting the queen aims to exploit the weak queenside pawn structure and prepare for a decisive kingside assault. Shifting the queen aims to create counterplay on the queenside, but it leaves the king exposed to the advancing white rooks. Simplifying to an endgame by trading queens opens up lines, a strategic shift to exploit space. Finally, clearing the central files opens up attacking avenues for both sides, setting the stage for a dynamic pawn race. Securing the open file for potential kingside pressure. This rook sacrifice unlocks crucial central pawn pressure, aiming to disrupt white's kingside structure. The rook now infiltrates the 7th rank, posing a direct threat to black's queenside pawn structure and potentially creating future tactical opportunities. Activating the rook along the open file brings immediate danger, potentially forcing decisive exchanges. Securing your monarch against the immediate discovery threats is paramount, prioritizing king's safety over any potential tactical skirmish. Seizing the open file offers a lifeline, though the king remains exposed for now. Activating the bishop and eyeing the weakened dark squares now pressures black's underdeveloped queenside. Repositioning the rook to pressure the 7th rank is a vital step in preparing for active piece play. Repositioning the bishop to the open diagonal targets black's compromised pawn structure and prepares for an active queenside presence. Liberating the bishop allows it to influence the kingside and contest the central squares. Grasping that rook initiates a dangerous offensive push, threatening the b-pawn and potentially opening lines towards black's vulnerable king. Reclaiming the central files now seems paramount after that exchange. Consider developing your remaining pieces with purpose. Consolidating the king's safety seems prudent, shielding it from potential harassment along the open files now that the dust has settled. Reclaiming the open file is paramount for black's rook, setting up potential pressure on white's weakened kingside. Dislodging the central pawn opens the d-file for powerful rook infiltration. Reclaiming the open file, the rook reestablishes critical pressure on white's back rank. Asserting control of the open file begins the endgame push. Simplifying to a winning rook endgame, this move prepares to contest the crucial open file. Asserting space on the queenside, this pawn advance aims to disrupt black's rook and prepare for potential infiltration. Reclaiming the d-file centralizes the rook, activating it for crucial defensive duties against white's advancing pawns. Targeting the queenside pawn structure, the rook aims to exploit weaknesses and potentially infiltrate. This rook's relocation to the 2nd rank aggressively challenges white's control over the open files and hints at a potential endgame advantage through pawn infiltration. Centralizing the monarch redeploys king's defensive shield. Unleashing the central pawn creates immediate queenside pressure and opens lines for your rook. King activation begins, seeking central influence and preparing to join the fight for territory. Unleashing this pawn opens vital lines for the black pieces and creates immediate tension on the queenside. Steering the rook to the open file to pressure black's central pawns and fight for initiative. The rook now vacates its post, potentially opening lines for white's upon advance and weakening black's pawn structure. Launching a pawn storm to create space for the queen and bishop is a bold, albeit risky maneuver. Activating the rook on the open file presents a direct threat to white's queenside pawns and aims to disrupt their coordination. Activating the rook on the 7th rank cracks open black's defense, creating immediate pressure. Opening the kingside to potentially disrupt white's pawn structure, but it weakens black's king safety. Activating the rook along the open 7th rank, white seeks to exploit the undefended pawns and create mating threats. Unleashing the rook to its advanced post immediately questions white's exposed king and its defensive structure. Reclaiming the central file offers a chance to re-establish piece activity after the pawn exchange. Unleashing a pawn's final gambit to disrupt the opponent's pawn structure. Securing the king behind this pawn shield, while black's active king threatens further disruption. The unexpected pawn sacrifice opens a critical diagonal, threatening to unravel white's kingside defense. Opening the g-file for a potential breakthrough now could expose your king. Sacrificing the rook to expose the white king. Securing the king after the checks, preparing for the inevitable queen trade and eyeing a potential passed pawn push. A bold discovered check aiming to disrupt white's king's safety and potentially win material. Unleashing the rook's power on the open file after a king's desperate repositioning. The king's desperate flight is met with a final, decisive check, forcing the monarch into an exposed position. Unwillingness to face the mating net's tightening grip, allowing the king to be cornered. Opening the g-file now exposes the black king to immediate threats, a gamble at this stage. Sacrificing the rook opens lines for the king in a desperate attempt to break through the defense.